It started like any ordinary night. The road was quiet, the hum of his engine steady, the kind of drive where your mind drifts and everything feels routine. But then, in the mirror, flashing red and blue lights cut through the darkness. His chest tightened. He knew what came next. The officer approached slowly, one hand resting on his holster, the other gripping a flashlight that sliced across his face. In that moment, he wasn't a man heading home. He was a suspect, judged before a word was spoken. What the officer couldn't see, what he was about to learn, was that the man he had stopped held more power than he could ever imagine. Marcus Williams wasn't just another driver on the road that night. He was a man who had built his entire career on integrity, discipline, and the quiet strength that comes from years of service. By day, he was calm, steady, the kind of professional whose presence demanded respect even in silence. He carried himself with dignity, not arrogance. To his neighbors, he was the man who waved as he left for work, who never missed a family barbecue, who stayed grounded despite the heavy responsibilities of his position. But to the officer who pulled him over, none of that mattered. All the officer saw was a black man behind the wheel of a sleek car in a quiet neighborhood. That was enough to spark suspicion. Marcus knew the weight of that glance. It was a story he'd seen replayed too many times in headlines and statistics. But tonight, it wasn't a statistic. It was him. As he pulled to the side of the road, his mind wasn't racing with guilt. He had done nothing wrong. Instead, it was racing with the possibilities. How quickly an ordinary stop could spiral out of control. How many lives had been changed forever on nights just like this one? He rolled down the window, the cool air brushing against his face, steadying his breath. To the officer walking up, Marcus was just another driver to be controlled, questioned, perhaps even humiliated. What the officer didn't realize was that Marcus wasn't just part of the system. He was the one who oversaw it, the head of internal affairs. And this encounter was about to turn into something far greater than a traffic stop. The officer's flashlight cut through the darkness, the harsh beam sliding across Marcus's face as though searching for guilt that wasn't there. His voice was sharp, almost rehearsed, demanding license and registration with a tone that carried more accusation than request. Marcus complied without hesitation, his hands deliberate, slow, visible at every moment. Years of training had taught him what civilians had to learn through fear. Any sudden move could be misinterpreted. Any gesture could be twisted into justification. But the officer wasn't satisfied. He leaned in closer, peering into the car as if expecting contraband or hidden evidence to peer out of thin air. "Where are you headed?" The question was casual on the surface, but Marcus knew what lay beneath it. The presumption that he didn't belong, that his presence required explanation. Marcus answered calmly, his tone controlled, steady, but the officer's eyes narrowed. Each word he spoke seemed to fuel suspicion rather than dissolve it. Behind the badge, this officer wasn't looking for truth. He was looking for power, and Marcus could feel it. The weight of being sized up not as a professional, not as a citizen, but as a threat. Then came the request. "Step out of the vehicle." It wasn't unusual, but Marcus knew the history. Too often, that simple command became the moment everything unraveled. He stepped out carefully, the gravel crunching beneath his shoes, the chill of the night pressing in around him. The officer circled him slowly, eyes scanning his frame with the kind of scrutiny reserved for suspects, not law-abiding men on their way home. Questions followed, sharper, more invasive, each one less about traffic violations and more about challenging Marcus's right to exist in that space. Where was he coming from? Why was he driving that car? Did he live around here? Every answer Marcus gave seemed to fall into a void, swallowed by the officer's preconceived narrative. This wasn't a search for truth. It was a search for control. Marcus kept his composure, but inside, his thoughts churned. He wasn't just fighting for his dignity. He was standing at the edge of a moment that could so easily become dangerous. The officer's hand lingered near his holster, as if the mere presence of Marcus's calm was an act of defiance. The silence stretched heavy, the power imbalance thick in the night air. And then, just when it seemed like the situation might spiral further, the officer demanded proof of who Marcus really was. Proof beyond the ID in his hand. Marcus looked at him steadily, the decision weighing on him. Should he reveal the truth now, or let the officer continue oblivious, to expose the bias driving every action? Because what the officer didn't realize was that the man he was trying to intimidate was the very person responsible for holding officers accountable. And if Marcus chose this moment, the entire encounter would shift. The stage was set. The tension crackled like static in the air. The question was no longer whether Marcus would comply. It was how long the officer's arrogance would last before the truth shattered it. The officer's voice grew sharper, his suspicion rising with every passing second. "You expect me to believe you just happened to be driving through here?" he barked, the words cutting through the quiet night. His hand hovered near his holster now, a silent threat wrapped in authority. To him, Marcus was no longer just a driver on the road. He was an intruder, someone to put in his place. Marcus stood still, breathing evenly, his posture calm but unyielding. Inside, his patience was fraying. He had given his license, answered every question, followed every instruction. Yet here he was, treated like a criminal in his own community. The officer's eyes narrowed further, scanning him with disbelief, as if waiting for Marcus to slip, to confirm the prejudice already burning in his mind. And then it happened. The officer demanded, "Prove you're not lying. Show me something real." Marcus reached slowly into his jacket, his movements deliberate, steady, each second stretched thin with tension. The officer's hand twitched toward his weapon, the air so thick with danger that even the sound of the wind felt sharp. But when Marcus's hand emerged, it didn't hold anything threatening. It held a badge, polished, unmistakable, the emblem of internal affairs, an authority that even the officer couldn't challenge. For a moment, the world froze. The officer's jaw slackened, his face drained of color. That badge wasn't just metal. It was power, oversight, accountability. Marcus wasn't just a black man on the roadside. He was the man who investigated officers like him. The silence was deafening. The officer's arrogance evaporated, replaced by a raw mix of shock and fear. His voice caught in his throat, the authority that once weighed heavy in his tone, now crumbling into stammered words. Marcus didn't gloat, didn't raise his voice. He simply held the badge steady, his calm presence now the sharpest rebuke of all. In that instant, the balance of power shifted completely. The hunter had become the hunted. The man who thought he held control was suddenly exposed, his prejudice laid bare under the light of the very system he served. The officer stepped back, his arrogance stripped away as quickly as it had flared. The silence between them was heavy, filled with the weight of what had just been revealed. Marcus didn't need to say much. His badge had spoken louder than words ever could. It wasn't just proof of who he was. It was a mirror, forcing the officer to confront the truth he had tried to deny. For Marcus, this moment wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about proving his own innocence. It was about something larger, the reminder that prejudice can blind even those sworn to uphold justice, that in a split second, bias can turn routine encounters into dangerous confrontations. As the officer stumbled through a half-hearted apology, Marcus remained steady, calm, controlled. He knew this wasn't an isolated incident. He had seen it too many times before, on reports, in complaints, in the broken trust between communities and the very people meant to protect them. Tonight, it had become personal. When Marcus finally walked away, it wasn't just a simple ending. It was a statement, a reminder that authority doesn't excuse prejudice, and that power means nothing when it's rooted in fear instead of fairness. The officer had tried to define Marcus by the color of his skin. Instead, Marcus defined himself through dignity, discipline, and the weight of accountability. But this story isn't just about one man and one officer. It's about a system, about moments that repeat across the country far too often. It forces us to ask, how many more times will someone's life be put at risk before the world learns to see beyond stereotypes? Because Marcus's story may have ended with his badge, but for countless others, it ends differently. The question is, how many more must it take before we finally choose justice over prejudice? And if stories like this matter to you, if you believe these truths shouldn't be ignored, then join us. Like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so more voices can be heard. Every click, every share, every voice adds to a conversation that needs to keep growing. The truth is, change doesn't come from silence. It comes from stories like these. Stories that pull back the curtain and demand reflection. And as you watch, as you share, as you speak, you become part of that change. Because Marcus's story may have ended with his badge, but for countless others, it ends differently. The question is, how many more must it take before we finally choose justice over prejudice?